fellow comrades, it is I, Sammy's cat, and after a week hiatus, I am finally back. Let's get back to this week in Ukraine. Over the past week and a half, hostilities have begun to intensify along the entire front line. Located footage shows that Russian military is in Dniprov. Another video appeared of the alleged Wagner group in former Ukrainian trenches, northwest of Klishchivka. Klishchivka has already been completely captured. Apparently, Wagner trenches are dug incorrectly, in a straight line, which is very susceptible to projectiles, allowing them to hit a much larger amount of manpower with these fragments, while in trenches, according to the rules of a zigzag, minimize the damage. This war has entered a new and more deadly and fateful phase. Although the war has reached a stalemate, fighting continues with both sides preparing for a bloody round of offensives. Russia has mobilized 300,000 new soldiers and is prepared to throw them into battle. Meanwhile, Russian factories are slaving away, producing more and more arms. Meanwhile, Ukraine is receiving more and more foreign weapons. The head of the European Council said that the next 2 to 3 weeks will be decisive for this war. And Ukraine intelligence predicts that around February and March, hostilities will develop in Luhansk and Donetsk. Russia unsuccessfully tried to land on one of the Potemkin Islands. Russia changed the tactics of its offensive and is no longer going ahead in columns without cover and air defense, as it did in February of last year. Of the 50,000 Russian prisoners recruited by Wagner PMC to participate in the war in Ukraine, only 10,000 remained at the front. More Russian field fortifications were spotted. The Russian general that withdrew from the west of the Dnipro River has been fired. The West is urging Ukraine to turn its attention away from the grueling battles in Bakhmut and focus more on the south. The central military district of Russia lives in these little tiny wooden huts. Ain't it cute? There was another mass rocket attack on Thursday targeting energy infrastructure again. New foreign tanks may not exactly be the game changer that we think, with some taking up to a year to deploy. The Abrams tanks may come too late. These Western tanks may not radically change the situation at the front since Russia has a lot more of them. This is in the words of Zelensky. So for the past 6 days, Russian internet commentators have claimed that Russian troops have made significant progress, breaking through defenses of Ukraine in Zaporizhia and Orikhiv. But this is unconfirmed and even partially contradicted. Azov is heading to Bakhmut for a Nazi-on-Nazi battle. For internet reasons, that was a joke. General Yevgeny Nikiforov became the commander of the Western Military District, and Colonel General Sergei Kuzovlev became commander of the Southern Military District. Mobiks in Belarus completed their training, but their combat effectiveness is questionable. A tank centimede appeared in the mud. As you can see, in these road conditions, 2 tanks can hardly evacuate a third. Now we move on to the politosphere. In December, there was an assassination attempt on Vitaly Bulyuk, a Russian-appointed deputy head of the administration of the Kherson region. A large corruption scandal is now folding in the military of defense. Journalists found out that the military department buys food for the armed forces of Ukraine at prices several times higher than market prices. The company originally denied the inflating of prices, and then the government claimed it was a technical error. Then it turns out it was government corruption, and a lot of people got laid off. People like Kirill Timoshenko were fired because of this. Zelensky apparently dismissed many of them, which many applaud because it shows that Ukraine is cracking down on corruption. Also, Ukrainian authorities aren't allowed to go abroad. So they can't do what the Russians do and piss off to France while everyone else fights. Good on you, Ukraine. As a result, another political official was fired for leaving to Thailand. The Russian Imperial Movement, an organization headquartered in St. Petersburg, founded in 2002, is behind the mailing of the bombs in Spain to the Ukrainian embassies. Volodin again threatened nuclear weapons. Little Big left Russia and is now classified as a foreign agent. In order to cross the Russian border between March 1st, 2023 and March 1st, 2024, there will be an electronic queue with advanced reservations. The court sentenced Major Alexei Ivanov to 3 years in a penal colony after finding him guilty of stealing a batch of aviation protective helmets and oxygen masks totaling over 22 million rubles. There's been a number of criminal cases related to crimes committed with the use of weapons, ammunition, and explosives, and this has increased by about a quarter in Russia. The greatest growth occurred in the Central Federal District, and in Moscow, it increased by 146%. The crimes against military servicemen in 2022 also increased by 3 times. A man in military uniform with a weapon appeared the other day near a cafe near Biryuch, Belgorod. This military man was drunk and at the same time pointed a weapon at vacationers. Apparently, this weapon was a flamethrower. In certain regions of Russia, passports are delayed for about 10 years. The UK military defense declared that Russia's losses as a result of the attack on Makivka exceeded 300 people. Now it is time for the propaganda section. The head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service said that Ukraine was allegedly placing Western ammunition at nuclear power plants. Messages were circulated on social networks allegedly written on behalf of Ukrainian ambassadors to Lithuania and Latvia, asking authorities to help extradite Ukrainians living there in order to mobilize them into Ukrainian armed forces. This is fake. The Kremlin is not discussing a ban on Russians traveling abroad, according to Peskov. Children and teenagers carried out a reconstruction of the Battle of Kursk in 1943 at a school in Sizran. This display cost 2,175,000 rubles. And for more events, another 3.5 million were allocated. A Chuvashian schoolgirl wrote poems about the heroism of the Russian soldiers of war in Ukraine. Elsewhere in Chuvashia, children are sewing sweatshirts, fleece socks, pillowcases, duvet covers, and towels for the mobiks, with the material purchased by the parents of the students. In Bashkiria, women are making noodles for the soldiers. RIA Novosti published a video trying to prove that Kamensk was under control of Russian forces. It shows what is claimed to be abandoned Ukrainian positions. However, at the same time, there are no Russian military or Russian equipment in the frame. Elders are knitting woolen socks in Chuvashia for the mobiks. Meanwhile, those in Kursk are preparing firewood. In Tambov, they're collecting curtains and old sheets to make camouflage nets. A vet clinic in Moscow is collecting dog hair to knit socks for the military. So remember that every time Russian soldiers walk, they are basically stepping on puppies. Children are sewing shirts and shorts in Belgorod. Women are making trench candles. And some women are making dry borscht. In Kuzbas, children were forced to shovel the driveways of the mobilized families. Now it's time for What the Mobiks Doin'. Putin will not issue a decree on the completion of partial mobilization because, according to Peskov, such a document is not needed. Kyrgyz and Tajik migrants who receive Russian citizenship are no longer allowed to leave the Russian Federation under the pretext of mobilization. Earlier, Ukrainian intelligence announced that Russia would announce mobilization close to the beginning of January. This did not happen, and now they are predicting February. The Legislative Assembly in Nizhny Novgorod handed their servicemen over 20 rams and sheep as payment. Power outages are occurring throughout Russia and are also affecting the families of the mobiks, to whom which authorities have promised to provide support. This is especially problematic in the Irkutsk region, where abnormal fronts of negative 50 degrees Celsius are happening, along with emergency power outage. Families are very much freezing in these areas. Putin is considering another wave of mobilizations up to 200,000 people, but Dmitry Peskov called this bullshit. In the Leningrad region, a conscript escaped from a military unit, crossed the border to Latvia, and escaped. Remember those guys that escaped to Alaska by crossing the Bering Strait? Well, they were allowed to remain in the country, and in a few months they'll receive a work permit. Honestly, I think they deserve it. If anyone tries to cross the Bering Strait, they deserve a medal. The age of recruits during the spring draft will not change. Shoigu approved the procedure for monthly social payments to the mobiks. Dmitry Peskov officially confirmed that convicts that are fighting for Wagner have been pardoned. Unemployed residents of the Peskov region are offered to go to war. For this special episode of What Putin Doing, we have an air defense system spotted near Putin's residence in Valdai. And now it is time for life in the war zone. Residents of a village in Kursk, whose houses were completely destroyed after the shelling, have been unable to get help from the local authorities. Russia apparently does not want to rebuild. Or just can't afford to. A pro-Russian blogger posted a video in which a Russian serviceman confesses to killing civilians in the occupied territories. He is being interrogated by the man who, judging by his uniform, is a member of military police of the Russian armed forces. And now it is time for Salty Russians, everyone's favorite. First, we have Medvedev in his campaign for the collapse of Western coalition and victory. Veterans Notes claims that men are cross-dressing in order to avoid mobilization. Mr. Pickles rants again about the Russian government, claiming that they must be doing drugs. Ukrainian heretics, Satanists are continuing to desecrate the Orthodox churches of the Russian Orthodox Church. Oh, the Satanists, oh, the horror! Prigozhin said that in Russia it is necessary to introduce criminal punishment for the glamorization of the army. Russian embassy in Germany is salty about Germany sending tanks. In Russia, censorship is needed so that young Russians do not look over the fence to the west, according to United Russia Party member Vladimir Plotnikov. At the same time, Plotnikov and his wife and daughter travel around the EU and NATO countries, and they love to relax in Dubai and the Maldives. Girkin mocked Prigozhin for saying all bad news about Wagner needs to be banned, and then referenced the famous Nuzhin execution. But that is not the only attack Mr. Pickles had for Prigozhin that week. When Prigozhin complained about Pickles' previous critical statements about Wagner, Girkin said, "I did not insult them, I made observation," which eventually led to a Prigozhin versus Girkin Smackdown, and oh boy was that funny. Mr. Pickles shit-talked Prigozhin, saying that Wagner could use some improvements. Prigozhin then said, "Well, why don't you join Wagner and show us how to fight then?" "Oh wait, you can't, you're banned from fighting, Lamau." Girkin then countered by saying that, "Yes, I am ready to join Wagner, but only on the condition that I am normally executed." And it's still going! The drama is still going! Kraken claims that there are killer robot police in San Francisco. Kraken claims that the makeup artist for the German foreign minister Baerbock cost 136,000 euros, and the photographs of Olaf Scholz cost more than 510,000 euros. In what world does makeup cost that much money, unless you're doing special effects? Kraken tries to cite a seemingly scholarly analysis, but the analysis uses the term Fourth Reich, so... And now it is time for With Love from Lukashenko. The Border Committee of Belarus states that 17.2 thousand Ukrainian soldiers are concentrated near the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Alexander Lukashenko stated that he was offered to conclude a non-aggression pact with Ukraine, to which Ukraine denied this. Now it is time for the Around the World section. I take a break from a week, and Germany still hasn't sent the Leopards. Okay, now they finally sent the Leopards. But a lot of other countries stepped up and offered to transfer the Leopards for Germany, and they were protests to free the Leopards in Germany. Meanwhile, Chinese companies are aiding Russia. Hungary opposed sanctions against Russia again, but said they will not block aid to Ukraine. Estonia announced the expulsion of the Russian ambassador. Estonia is also considering blocking the Gulf of Finland for Russian ships. There is now evidence that North Korea is helping Russia with weapons. Russia threatened Germany not to send tanks, and NATO and the EU did it anyways. Turkey is being a bit of a sour bitch. Russian troops on the border with Finland are now less than 25% of what they were before the Z operation. The Strasbourg court declared the Kremlin responsible for Igor Girkin, to which Mr. Pickles said, "I did not agree to that. I did not give Russia credit for my war crimes. They are my war crimes. I did them." Supposedly, Morocco transferred some tanks to Ukraine, but they denied it, saying that they were bought in Belarus and were being modernized in Czechia, who transferred them to Kiev. To which Mr. Pickles said, "Did Belarus just backstab us?" And then later revealed that Lukashenko denied all this. Trump said, "We need a peace deal, end the conflict now." Trump, that's not how it works. You know that's not how it works. You were the president for Hungarian foreign minister claims that the Transcarpathian Hungarians are brutally mobilizing the Ukrainian army. Hungary, you're starting to smell a bit like Serbia here. The US declared Wagner a terrorist organization and implemented sanctions against it. Military Commander Sutton made an infographic on the supply of tanks to Ukraine. Italy will supply weapons to Ukraine at least until the end of 2023. The government of Kazakhstan tightened the rules of stay for foreigners, canceling the Visarion from January 27, 2023. Apparently, this will affect Russians that have moved to Kazakhstan. Poland is going to supply Tvari tanks, Ukraine received Belgian personal carriers, and Finland suspended granting asylum to Russians who fled from mobilization. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that Germany is approaching its limit of its capabilities in supplying tanks to Ukraine. After we had to pry them from your cold, dead hands? And now it is time for the memes and the lulz. The Lord has blessed us once again with hilarious antics of the Belarusian army. We have an interesting retreat tactic here. Radovka propagandist Anastasia Eluskova absolutely failed here. Here's a funny Russian meme. Apparently, Raytheon asks its candidates whether or not they play War Thunder. And last but not least, we have a deflated dummy tank. And that's about it for this week in Ukraine. Until then, this is Sami's Cat signing off.